Hi guys, this is Ivan. This is for the RPG Crusade. First, a little bit of housekeeping. Rick, this is a Valenti base. Fender bases are 2D. This is a 4D base. It's like a Fender bass on steroids. I own a bunch of these. They're made by a guy named Nino Valenti. He's out of Staten Island. He used to work for Roger Sadowski. Sadowski bases is probably a more recognizable name. These things are exquisite. They are not cheap. They play like a dream. They are extremely well made. They sound awesome. And just like finding your ideal role-playing game experience, once you've played one of these, you're kind of screwed. You really can't go back. So life kind of imitates itself. A little bit more housekeeping. I didn't feel it was necessary when I made the original video on YouTube to exactly cite every single source, but all of the verbiage I used to describe what 4D role-playing is, it all comes from you. I didn't make it up. So, although I looked at a lot of your videos and read a bunch of stuff you wrote, like 95% of the verbiage comes from the following. Reactionary Principles Gaming, what is 4D Roleplay, and the 2 benefits of 4D Roleplay. And yes, I'm reading because I'm 56. I can't remember what the hell I wrote down or anything. 28 millimeter, The Mind's Eye, why 4D Roleplaying, why we believe it is superior, which is like a round table of a bunch of you. How to 4D Roleplay Part 1, 4D Game Mastery, How and What to Prep. Table Runner Crispy, a whole bunch of his videos, a lot of his chats with my friend Anthony, who goes by the name of Runeslinger on YouTube. Dice Tales, 4D Role-Playing is Just Better. 28 millimeters written description, which was on Discord, which he shared with Same Old G, who was nice enough to share it with me. And of course, Shauner's book, How to Role-Play the Hard Way, which I've read a bunch of times, way before I heard of 4D role-playing or the RPG Crusade. Now here's the thing. You guys haven't just publicly talked about, shared, like 4D role-playing. Here's a bunch of procedures that we use to get this experience. Inadvertently or on purpose, you have declared a model, describing role-playing as a whole and categorizing things, and as such, it's, fair game for, a peer review. And so, criticism of this model is not a criticism of you. It's not a criticism of 4D role-playing. It's not a criticism of the gaming you're doing. It's just a criticism of the model. The model, the categories within it are arbitrary and flawed. And a great example of that is from the excellent podcast that Same Old G just did, Talking to Max. It was just on last night, so I listened to it, last night and today, where they discuss a bunch of things, including Burning Wheel. And they're talking about, well, what kind of game is Burning Wheel really? Because it's got all these elements of 2D role-playing according to the model. But then you look at other things and does Burning Wheel, involve a game master with a prepared railroad story? No, it does not. Not even a little bit. Is the play directed by the players? Yes, it is. And so you start to see that the various things used to describe the different dimensions of role-playing, well, they don't necessarily all coincide with each other. And so, as a model, it kind of falls apart. A huge amount of your public bandwidth is spent on promoting and describing that model, looking at the other tiers or dimensions of role-playing and kind of being disparaging about them. I don't think that serves your purpose. I think it's a bit of a waste of your time because, ostensibly your purpose is to have an immersive in-character experience, talk about the techniques that you use to get that, to help other people get that same experience if they want the kind of experience that you're having. So that pretty much takes care of the first 3 points of my original video, which I took a lot longer to say, and I think I said it better this time. The last point that I had made is a little bit more difficult to discuss, and that's the one where I talk about the idea that the results or the end experience that people might have as a result of using all of 4D role-playing, all the procedures and what have you, may not always be an immersive in-character experience. It depends upon the person. It depends about some nuances of intention, which I'll get to in a minute. So basically, ostensibly, like I said before, your goal is to have an immersive in-character experience. That's my goal. That's the goal of a lot of other people. Discourse has been going on about this for 50 years. The guy named Jonathan Peterson wrote a book called The Elusive Shift, where he's looking at the correspondence from the original people that were playing 50 years ago, playing Dungeons and Dragons, playing adjacent games. They're talking about the experiences they're having, the different intentions for play that they have. Why are we getting this? One person getting this experience? Why are you getting that experience? How can we make this happen again? What do you think is really happening? But no, I think that something else is happening here. All that kind of stuff. Later on, groups like The Forge, look at intentions for play again. Created a lot of games, talked about them, play tested the heck out of them, talked to each other about how did this feel, did this, get us where we wanted to go, or did this prevent the kind of experience we wanted to have. Even today, there's a whole bunch of groups, including the group that I'm involved in, the bodaciously named RPG Techniques Consortium, which I did not name, but I am a member of, where we do the same sort of thing. We talk about techniques, we talk about different intentions for play. How do we get there? We actually play games, talk about, well, how did this feel when we did this, and when we did that? Did this get us further or closer to the goal that we had? And my mention that the potential pitfalls of some of the procedures, that's based upon experience, mine and the experience of a lot of other people. It's not conjecture. And it's interesting, when Phil talks about this idea that if Shauner and Crispy and Rick and Max all of a sudden didn't want to play with him anymore, he wouldn't have anybody else to play with. That's unfounded. Now look, I understand that it's difficult to find people that share your exact aesthetic. I went through a journey myself, which I talked a lot about on my channel, finding the right people to play with. But there's a lot of people out there that want and are achieving an immersive in-character experience. It's not 1 in 10,000, it's not 1 in 100. It's a much larger group of people. That said, not everybody is going to be following all the procedures of 3D or 4D roleplay. I'll never be one of those people that say, oh, I always 3D roleplayed or I always 4D roleplayed, because I didn't always follow all the procedures you have there, but I've achieved an immersive in-character experience, all the same, because my intentions for parts of it are a little bit different. And one of the things you have to ask yourself, is the process or is the product more important? I mean, my bias shows instantly I'm more of a product person. Is following all of the listed guidelines and procedures of 4D roleplay the end goal, or is getting the immersive in-character experience the end goal? And, at its heart, 4D role-playing, 3D role-playing, they're not an experience, they're a list of procedures to get you to an experience. But it may vary. The actual effect of those things may vary depending on some intentions. And look at it this way. Your attention from an in-character perspective is going to be interrupted during a game on a regular basis. It might be because you're asking, a question in or out of character. It might be because you're narratively inserting something. It might be because you're, using a mechanic, for a variety of reasons. The goal, it's clear your goal is, and my goal is to minimize the impact of those things. And so one of the things you have to ask yourself and to find out is, does a given technique preserve or disrupt your immersion in character? And based upon some what seem like subtle differences of intention, subtle differences in the type of in-character roleplay experience you want to have, can have huge impacts on the final experience you have, and can either knock you out of immersion or really preserve your immersion. It's like the slight differences in course that you make to a vessel, 10 miles later, 100 miles later, they're in completely different places. So there are varieties of the kind of in-character experience you may want to have, whether it's a more, I want the world to be very solid, and I don't want to make up things outside of my character. I want a really solid, immobile game world that I can't influence. Or do you want to have an immersive in-character experience where you are a lot more collaborative? You are making decisions based upon in a particular aesthetic, or wanting to have a certain kind of drama, or make it like a movie. These things sound almost like they're inconsequential. They can be really, really huge. So you have to ask yourself, do these techniques preserve or disrupt your immersion in character? Something like narrative insertion versus answering questions, depending on your intention, narrative insertion of a fact, like, I'm going to jump across these two buildings because I wanted to do that, and because it makes sense, I'm going to do that. Well, now you've narratively inserted, how close they are together. That may preserve your in-character experience. In fact, one of the things I said, based on the idea that it seems like you guys are really pushing towards a more collaborative, more cinematic, you're making decisions based upon that kind of thing, more to make it more dramatic. That's not pejorative. That's based on some things you've said, watching you, and even kind of backed up with what Rick said about when he's a game master. He doesn't want people to ask about that. He just wants them to jump from one freaking building to the other, and let's keep it moving. Let's pick up the piece of driftwood and do the thing I wanted to do with the driftwood, like Max said. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying that supports a certain type of in-character experience. And so logically, narratively inserting those things, helps preserve that. If you want something a little bit different like I do, then narrative insertion of those details completely disrupts your immersion in character. What is much better for my immersion in character, what preserves it more, is to ask that clarifying question: how far apart are these buildings? Because it's an analog for using my senses. It's an analog for using my in-character judgment, the judgment of my character. Whether I ask that question in or out of character, it feels much more in character. It feels much more immersive. Very slight differences of intention, but all of a sudden the techniques really matter. Which one are you going to use? And there's this point, like Phil said, there's that point like where like he's started to find it disruptive to his immersion when he's having to make up his nation and now the culture and all this kind of stuff. Started to get him, and that's not an aha, I got you moment. That's like, yeah, it can be a matter of scale. But the threshold for each individual person based on those intentions, varies. Something like avoiding mechanics versus speaking the mechanics. Yes, I know I watched your actual plays. I know that you speak the mechanics. But over and over again in the model, you talk about, one of the hallmarks of 3 and 4D play is you never have out of character communication. And guess what that includes? That includes the mechanics. Shauner's book, once again, is a little less prescriptive, but you start to read it. You start to read him talking about, this can be a real boon for you, and using all this signal language to talk about the mechanics rather than using the mechanics. And the implication is really strong not to do it. Once again, depending upon the person, depending upon like how they, I don't want to say mental gymnastics, but for some people it's much easier to just, surface all of a sudden out of immersion, use the mechanic. And for some of us, even the physical analog of rolling those dice can be like, the action of rolling those dice can be like a physical analog for jumping across those two buildings. For other people, it's much less disruptive to use all those signal words. Where for somebody like me, depending on the game, and Anthony and I disagree on this sometimes, I find having to do all that mental translation into the signal words more disruptive to the in-character experience. So all of a sudden I'm focusing all of my energy there. That's the point I'm trying to make with that. Things like adherence to not having time violations, as you call them, and to having, narrating really discrete 30-second actions and what have you. Not narrating, I want to, find that get the tire iron because I want to use it on this person. That may be more, that may preserve your immersion in character. Whereas to somebody like me, that can be more disruptive to my immersion in character. It's much more immersive for me to say, I'm looking for the tire iron because I want to use it for this purpose. I'm broadcasting my intention to the game master. I'm in character because I know why I'm looking for the damn tire iron. The times that I told Anthony I want to search the bottom of this burned out house in Call of Cthulhu, and I'm looking for these particular things. Did Anthony then move my character around? Yes, I told him to. It felt very immersive to me because I still felt very much in character. The slight differences in intention for what kind of in-character experience we want to have, but man, can it really have a profound impact. And even like something like, a little tangential, but when you guys talked about you have social interactions elsewhere, this is not the place for social interaction. There are different layers of experience that we're having all at the same time, and I'm watching your actual plays. Particularly the one that stood out for me was, Fear City Part 2, where you're playing these larger-than-life gangsters in 1975, and I can watch the smiles. I can watch you guys appreciating the depiction of these gangsters. And yes, it's a little performative. I didn't mean that pejoratively. You're performing for yourself, like Phil said, but you're a little bit of performing for each other. And, you're listening to each other intently. You're riffing off of each other, but I can see that appreciation of that role play. And in a slightly different way, but, kind of the same. You can look at our Call of Cthulhu session number 15, 6 minutes and 40 seconds in, but who's counting? All you need to know about it is that in the previous session, my character, Terrence McSweeney, was climbing down this well that's dry. A rung broke. He falls all the way down to the bottom of the well. Now the well is filling up with cold November water. He's in serious danger of drowning or hypothermia or whatever. And Brian's character, Alfred Smalls, is this big, fat, rotund, out-of-shape guy who can barely lift himself up. And Brian's narrating that Alfred's trying to get down the well to save Terrence, because that's not what Alfred do. That's very in character. And you can watch Anthony and I desperately trying not to break character. Anthony desperately trying not to break the narrator mode of being a game master. And we're failing. We're just laughing a little bit, and we're trying to cover our faces. And I'm turning beet red. And you can tell we're having this other social interaction. Kind of laughing at that. We're not breaking character. If it was a different game, different intention, we probably would have. And what the hell are you doing, Brian? We're not doing that. But there's a social interaction going on at the same time. So at the end of the day, I'm asking you to consider that, based upon people's makeup based upon nuances of intention for that same in-character experience, immersive in experience, that sometimes the techniques, one set of techniques, whether it's 4D role play or another set of techniques that I might use, won't work for everybody. That in fact, sometimes they have the exact opposite effect as intended. So that's just something to consider.